Hello and welcome to ACC TV. I'm Karen Martin. Today's Q&A program covers a vitally important aspect of life in aged care setting, and that is food safety. But first, I want to mention a special ACC new release. Imagine being in pain but unable to communicate it. Well, thousands of people with dementia are experiencing this right now. It's a complex situation, as you know, and that can cause confusion for carers and loved ones. Coming to ACC in May is a comprehensive program about recognising the signs of pain in people living with dementia and managing that pain appropriately. It follows the guidelines set out by the Australian Pain Society and will be an excellent resource for every AN and care worker. An expert panel will join us to discuss the challenges from different perspectives. For all of our ACC online members, the program will be available in your library for free. So make sure you save the date. It's Wednesday, the 11th of May. See Change, Think Pain, Pain Management for People with Dementia. It's a program, honestly, you won't want to miss. Now to today's broadcast, food safety, and I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Karen Abbey. Karen, you're a food service specialist from the company Nutrition and Catering Consultancy. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Karen, for having me.
So Karen, you've been involved with the food services industry for around the world for over 20 years, particularly in aged care and in dining rooms and food services. Can you tell us something about your roles you've had?
Sure, Karen. Look, many roles over 20 years, but basically, obviously in the area of training, I've done lots of consultancy work, building kitchens, design outfits, but also developing resources for the aged care sector as well. So, wide variety of things.
So, as you can hear, she's well experienced for today's program. Karen, there are so many risks and hazards associated with food handling. How do you help an organisation maintain the integrity of their food safety program? Where do you even start?
Well, Karen, I think it's really important to look at the food safety plan as being one of the pinnacle pieces of your food safety. And I mean, following that plan quite closely, doing your documentation right there and then, making sure your documentation is filled in correctly, and I suppose monitoring all the aspects of a food safety plan. And yes, it takes constant effort every single day, but basically that's what aged care homes need to be doing.
Well, it sounds very exciting, all the work that you've been doing. So let's hope you'll enjoy watching Food Safety. Don't forget you can refer to your learning resources as you watch and write down any notes or questions that you have. And of course, Karen is here after the program to answer any questions live in the ACC studio. You can call us on 1800 658 499. And don't forget, you could win a $100 gift voucher just for sharing your question or comment with us. So right now, settle back. Here's Food Safety.
Headache, fever, vomiting, diarrhea. Unpleasant to say the least. Now just imagine being one of the residents you care for going through these symptoms.
Yeah.
Margaret, it's Judy. You buzzed.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
No, I'm not. No.
What's wrong?
I just feel awful. Got pains in my stomach. I just feel terrible.
You don't look very well.
With a lowered immunity, the elderly can face high-risk situations when struck with food poisoning, such as kidney failure or even death.
I'll go and get the observation equipment and I'll take your observations and then I'll go and see the registered nurse and she'll come and see you. Is there something I can get you before I go?
I don't know.
All right then. I won't be long.
Hi, I'm Dr. Karen Abbey, a nutrition and catering consultant specialising in aged care. In this program, we'll explain why organisations are required to have a food safety program. We'll describe the components of a food safety program and we'll detail the food safety hazards. Australia has one of the safest food supplies in the world.
Hi, Carls. Oh, I've spoken to Milva and she'd like a pie. So we're going to put the pies on tomorrow night.
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
We assume contamination and food poisoning incidences are uncommon. simply because we have an increasingly better knowledge, awareness and practice of good hygiene.
That meat looks pretty good too.
But food poisoning is not uncommon, and there's a high cost associated with food contamination. Prevention is the key, otherwise someone we know, love or are caring for might become unwell with food poisoning.
In 2010, there were 151 outbreaks of foodborne illnesses in Australia. 409 people were affected. 28 of these outbreaks were due to food prepared in aged care facilities. On average, food poisoning affects nearly 5.5 million Australians each year, resulting in 120 deaths, 1.2 million visits to doctors, 300,000 prescriptions for antibiotics, and 2.1 million days of lost work. More often than not, it's how we handle our food that puts us at risk of food contamination. To assist with managing food safely within Australia, each individual state or territory has a number of legislative requirements we must adhere to, and they directly affect you and your workplace. The Australia-New Zealand Food Safety Standards Code outlines that aged care residents are classed as vulnerable people, which is why organisations such as aged care facilities must implement a documented and audited food safety program. A food safety program is a written document that indicates how a food business will effectively control the food safety hazards associated with food handling activities, especially for vulnerable people.
So this is our food safety program. Have you ever worked with one of these before?
I did in my last job.
Oh, that's great. Well, we'll go through this now. But if you ever need to refer to it, it's always kept over here on the shelf.
That's good to know. I worked in a different state before, so things could vary.
Yeah, that's right.
Each food safety program will identify potential hazards occurring in all aspects of food handling. It'll outline how to control and monitor those hazards. It'll explain how to take action when there is a hazard, and it will describe how to ensure appropriate food records are kept.
But even with all that in place, it is still up to you to make the right decisions. A food safety hazard is any circumstance that can cause contamination of food, leading to harm or injury to the person who eats that food.
Potentially hazardous foods are foods which need to be kept at certain temperatures in order to minimise the growth of any bad bacteria. Hazardous foods usually have a high protein and water content. They can include gravy and soups, as well as cooked rice and pasta. Uncooked foods such as salad, sandwiches, quiche, sushi, soft cheeses, pate and dips are also potential hazards. Food safety hazards are categorised as biological, physical, chemical or allergen. Biological contamination is bacteria, and in the right conditions it will multiply. Conditions necessary for bacterial growth include warmth, food, moisture and time. Physical contamination is caused by things that should not be in food, like pests or insects, hair, band-aids, dirt, glass or stones. Chemical contamination can be caused by things such as cleaning agents, detergents and insect sprays, which is why chemicals should be stored in a separate place away from food. And lastly, allergen contamination. Nuts, seafood, wheat products, as well as dairy and eggs are all common allergens. Using the same knife or chopping board to cut raw meats and vegetables can cause cross-contamination, which can make a person very ill.
By avoiding each of these hazards, you can prevent foodborne illness and prepare safe food.
There are 11 pieces to the food safety pie, and each piece represents a critical stage as food moves through the preparation process. Receiving food. When receiving food, always check the expiry date, the integrity of the packaging, and the overall quality of the product. and most importantly, the temperature. Hot food must be received above 60 degrees Celsius, cold food below 5 degrees, and frozen food to be hard frozen at -15.
This is where the food safety program comes into play. So every time meat arrives, we need to check the temperature, that it's in the right temperature range. So I'll just put that in. As you can see, the temperature's too high, so we'll have to send that back with the delivery driver.
When receiving food, remember to check the temperature, the expiry date, the packaging integrity, and the overall quality. The next piece of the food safety pie is food storage.
In order to ensure good rotation, newly received food should be labelled and stored appropriately, and older food should be rotated to ensure it's used first. Food past its use-by date should be discarded.
Potentially hazardous foods must be stored in appropriate storage equipment such as fridges or freezers. These should be monitored at least twice a day to ensure they're in good working order. Additionally, raw food should be stored physically below, or better yet, separate to ready-to-eat foods. This prevents contamination of the ready-to-eat foods. Utensils such as knives, chopping boards and other equipment used for raw foods should be separate from those used for ready-to-eat products. Remember to label food for rotation. Discard expired food. Monitor refrigerators at least twice a day and separate raw and ready-to-eat food. Moving on to thawing of food.
The safest way to thaw frozen food is by storing it in a refrigerator or cool room, maintained at a maximum of 5 degrees Celsius, or, for smaller portions, using a microwave on the defrost setting. Thawed food should be used immediately or stored in a cool room for no longer than 48 hours. Ensure that food products are entirely thawed before they're cooked.
Ideally, thaw food in the refrigerator or cool room. Use thawed food within 48 hours, and remember to thaw food entirely before cooking. Temperature control is critical when cooking food safely. Use cooking probes where possible to ensure that meat reaches the right core temperature.
That's perfect, Heather. Cooked above 75 degrees and it smells great too.
Food should be cooked to 75 degrees Celsius or to 70 degrees for 2 minutes.
The purpose of temperature control is to ensure the safety of food by preventing the growth of bacteria. You must minimise the time that food spends in the temperature danger zone in order to protect your residents from food poisoning.
Remember to cook food to 70 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes or to 75 degrees. Temperature control prevents bacterial growth. Which brings us to time control.
Food poisoning bacteria needs time to start multiplying to unsafe numbers. When it does, it can cause food poisoning. But it only takes 2 hours for bacteria to reach dangerous levels. In food safety, we use the 2-hour, 4-hour rule.
The length of time food spends in the danger zone of between 5 and 60 degrees Celsius should be monitored in order to keep food safe. Up to 2 hours, foods should be either consumed, returned to refrigeration below 5 degrees, or reheated to 70 degrees or above. Between 2 and 4 hours, foods need to be consumed immediately. And after 4 hours, foods need to be thrown away. Remember to minimise the time food spends in the temperature danger zone of between 5 and 60 degrees Celsius. The next critical food safety segment is cook chill.
Cook chill refers to the process in which food is prepared, cooked and then chilled. Food preserved using this method can be stored for up to 5 days before reheating and serving.
The food is rapidly chilled to 5 degrees Celsius or below and held at that temperature. Cook chill foods must be reheated to 70 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes or 75 degrees before serving.
Many residents in aged care receive texture modified and puree foods, which should only be stored for a maximum of 48 hours before reheating and consumption.
Cook-chill food is prepared, portioned, cooked and chilled. It must be reheated to 70 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes or to 75 degrees before serving. Cook-chill foods can only be stored for 5 days. Reheating of cooked foods. Where previously cooked food is to be reheated, it follows the same reheating rules as other foods. 70 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes or up to 75 degrees. Then it can be held at least 60 degrees until served. All food should only be reheated once. Reheat food to 70 degrees Celsius for 2 minutes or to 75 degrees. Hold at 60 degrees Celsius or above until served, and remember only reheat food once. Which brings us to hot holding, plating and serving food.
Where foods are kept hot after cooking, they should be kept under temperature control during plating. Foods to be served hot should be kept at 60 degrees or above. Total time between plating and consumption should not exceed 2 hours.
It's common that a hot holding temperature is taken, and it's best practice to take a temperature of the last plated meal. Remember to keep food under temperature control during plating. Serve at 60 degrees Celsius or above. The time between plating and consumption must not exceed 2 hours, and take the temperature of the last plated meal. Preparation of ready-to-eat foods.
All potentially hazardous ingredients used in the preparation of ready-to-eat foods, such as sandwiches and salads, should be kept under temperature control prior to and during the preparation of these foods.
And remember, to stop any of your own bacteria getting into food, practicing good hygiene is essential. Ready-to-eat foods should be stored at appropriate temperatures. Keep preparation times short and always practice good hygiene. The next critical food safety segment is cross-contamination.
All food preparation tasks should be performed in an area especially designated for the purpose. Equipment should only be used for its intended purpose and should be kept clean and well maintained.
Equipment and utensils used for raw foods should be thoroughly washed or sanitised before they're used for cooked or pre-prepared foods. Dishwashers should be used as per the manufacturer's recommendations. Ensure kitchen surfaces are cleaned with food-safe chemicals and left to dry. To prevent cross-contamination, perform all tasks in designated areas. Wash utensils before reusing and keep all surfaces clean. The final piece of the food safety pie is support programs.
It's important that your food safety program is built upon a strong foundation of support programs, including education, using only approved suppliers, monitoring allergens and intolerances, as well as good menu planning and food recall.
Building and equipment support programs underpin an effective food safety program, including building maintenance, pest control, cleaning and sanitation.
Another support program involves the staff. For example, food handlers must practice good personal hygiene at all times.
This means washing hands before touching food and covering any cuts or abrasions with a blue Band-Aid. And wearing hairnets is another important part of personal hygiene. Food handlers should avoid direct contact with ready-to-eat food, using utensils wherever possible. And where that's not practical, gloves should be worn. Any staff who have contracted gastroenteritis should not return to work until 48 hours after the symptoms have gone.
The Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point System, otherwise known as HACCP, is designed to identify and control hazards in food safety.
Food safety is everyone's responsibility, and every piece of the food safety process is critical.
Oh wow, that smells and looks really great.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait to see what Melba thinks of this.
And
your blouse.
Excuse me, here you go, Melva. Compliments of the chef.
Thank you, dear. That looks very nice. Looks delicious, doesn't it? Very nice. They cooked that specially for your birthday, so I'll drink a toast to your birthday. Happy birthday.
In order to ensure food safety, every member of the team plays a vital role. Food safety is important every day when preparing and serving food to your residents.
Welcome back. The lines are now open, so if you have a comment or question for Karen, the number to call is 1800 658 499. Now Karen, that was a fantastic program and you covered a lot of material in that program. So let's just seek some clarification about some of the points you made in the program. So Karen, when we made this program, we had a lot of discussion around the 4 to 2 hour rule. Can you please explain the rule and why confusion exists around the rule?
Yeah, sure, Karen. I think what's really important is about how food actually gets prepared and how long you hold it for. Also things like sandwiches and those ready-to-made foods and how long you keep them out. So basically, for the first 2 hours, if you say, for example, have food in a bain marie, you can actually keep it for that 2 hours. And in that 2 hours, if you don't need that food, you can safely return it back to refrigeration, and you really should make sure that within 2 hours it actually gets below, obviously, 5 degrees. In the next 2 hours, though, between the 2 to 4, you actually need to be eating the food. Okay, so it must be consumed. After 4, what we're suggesting is that it actually gets thrown away.
Yeah, thrown away.
So it's 2 to 4. Okay, a little bit different if you're doing cook chill, where it's actually you got the 4 hours and then the 2 then the 4 hours. But basically the same sort of principles. We want to make sure food is always kept really safe.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. So does this rule apply to all foods, such as texture modified foods as well?
Yeah, it applies for everything, actually. So it doesn't matter what it is. It could be a sandwich, it could be a salad, it could be a hot meal. It really does apply to all foods that are produced in an aged care home, and especially texture mod. And the reason why texture modification foods are is because they go through an additional step in which they use a vitamiser to actually make the food smooth with no lumps. And from that, you want to make sure that you're following that to the rule very closely.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Karen. And of course, you can call us on 1800 658 499. We're waiting to take your call or comments. So Karen, in your role as a consultant, as a food services consultant in aged care, are there common problems you see all the time when you work in facilities?
Unfortunately, Karen, yes, there is, and sometimes they're really simple things, and I think it comes back to the fact that food services is a very busy environment. People have got to get out the meals for the residents. It's very like we call it peaks and troughs. Basically, when it's meal time, it gets really busy, and so some of the things I see when I go around and do pre-audits and things is date labelling is one of them. Really comes to mind.
People don't do the date; they just leave it off, or they're just out of date?
No, there's a little bit of both, I think. It's actually having a good system in place to go through things like cool rooms and refrigerators and make sure that you obviously are using things first. Anything that's open gets used. People are checking, don't go get a new one and then actually just bring it in, check to make sure the product actually is being used. And I think sometimes it's just a bit of a lapse as well. So, you might have something that's open and someone's neglected to put on it like a day dot or a date or something. So they're sorts of problems. And then you've got things like filling in documentation. I think, again, because there's a lot of documentation, even if you're using electronic food service system, which are available, making sure that documentation's filled in, and so little gaps and things and stuff. And I think when you go through and do kind of pre-audits, you can say, things are missing, but unfortunately everything has to be filled in.
So when's your advice to people watching? When should they do the documentation?
Well, the documentation really should be done right there and then. Actually get it done
in the middle of stirring something?
Well, when you're taking a temperature, really, obviously you put it in, takes a couple of seconds to get up, you then get the temperature. Really, the documentation should be right there.
Right there.
Because what happens is we get very busy, and so it might have been 82 degrees, for example, and everyone's busy, and what happens is they basically walk away going, 81, 70, what was it? So again, it's actually really good rule, get it done right then and there.
So when I worked in aged care facilities, there was this, many relatives used to sometimes bring in food that they'd prepared at home or bought from an outside source. They'd come in and they'd feed the loved one, whatever they could at the time, but then they'd often ask us to reheat it. Our policy where I worked was you could not reheat the food. Can you talk us through that?
This is tricky, really tricky, because we all have to remember that obviously residents, that's their home, and we really need to honour that because that really is their home. And what do you do? Okay, so let's break it down, Karen. Firstly, homes should have a logbook. So if you are bringing something into the home, it actually gets logged.
Yes.
So the reason why that occurs and is in place is so that if, for example, and hopefully this never happens, there is an outbreak, then what happens is the home can identify what's been brought in and actually what is the home's actually produced. Having said that though, if you actually wanted to bring some Chinese, and we'll use that as the example, or fish and chips for your loved ones, then basically you really should get it from the shop and bring it straight to the facility so it's nice and hot anyway, and do those sorts of things. Homes can actually provide a microwave if it's part of their policy. And I suppose this is when we start talking about that policy area in terms of what will a home actually allow. They can't let relatives or friends into the food service kitchen areas. That's just no. You really don't want to be doing that. And I suppose really it's about having some sort of a system.
Yeah.
Now, do staff even have the time to be reheating meals? Again, that's the other question. And actually, what's that policy? And if you are going down that way, well, the staff have to reheat it and actually do take a temperature to make sure it gets back up to the correct temperature. So I always say, I think to homes, the best thing is they're going to either take the loved one out if they can, and I understand that a lot of homes you can't do that for some of the residents we have because they're frail. But if you want to bring something in, bring it in straight from the shop because you do have the 2 hours.
Sure. So then that means that the actual staff need to instruct relatives and, in fact, tell them of their policy.
Yes.
And encourage them that if they are bringing things in, to bring it straight from the shop.
Yeah, and I mean, that's actually when I used to run our food safety program in an aged care home, what's really good about that is actually when you get your newsletter for your residents and your friends, relatives, basically put food safety information in about how your program works so that they actually understand the reasons why. And that's really good communication and makes it nice and friendly, I think. But it's really important, I think, if you can get it straight from the shop and bring it in, that's fantastic. It's going to be nice and hot and it's going to be lovely and fresh as well. As for if they want to leave something behind, well, maybe the policy might have to be they have to come back and actually reheat it if the home is prepared to provide a microwave and to do those sorts of things.
Thank you.
It's a little bit tricky, but I think, you've got to try and everyone's got to try, I think, understand that the food safety policy and program exists for the safety of residents and then try and find the best way to mediate through all those kinds of
Well, I think Karen's given you some good advice. Now, look, we can rave on all day to each other. We can do the Karen Show, but you can join this Karen Show on 1800 658 499. We look forward to your call. Karen, the other thing is there's a rise in allergies in the population, isn't there?
Oh,
My
yeah.
goodness. Why do you think this is occurring?
Well, firstly, it's really interesting. The latest research is showing that Australia has one of the highest rates of allergens and in fact intolerances. So firstly, let me just explain. An allergy is something that actually when you're allergic to a food and you have an autoimmune response. And intolerance is something where you don't tolerate the food very well and it makes you very unwell. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if you've got an allergen response, you're actually not very well at all, but there's a little bit of a difference between them. And those rates are rising, and it's because firstly we've got better diagnostics. So development, like the diagnostics of celiac disease, dairy intolerances, and don't forget, it's interesting to watch things like dairy and lactose intolerance. As we naturally age, Karen, the lactase in our body actually is not as prominent, so therefore people can develop lactose intolerance as they age. As for allergens, well, I think from what I've noticed in aged care now, we've had, we're probably, I suppose, a little bit stable in that area, probably more intolerances than allergens. However, that's actually going to increase because, again, we've got issues with some of our food supply. They're talking about, our very young people not being exposed, like we're all too clean and sterile and things like that. So it's a very, very complex issue. But as more and more people age, more and more people coming into aged care homes, we're obviously seeing more and more of these things.
Well, what's your advice for homes who are handling somebody with an allergy? In the case of someone with dementia or whatever, do they just stop serving that food altogether in case that person gets it?
Well, there's a couple of issues there, Karen. Firstly, if, for example, someone's allergic to something like a strawberry or they've got an intolerance that makes them sick, yes, you've got to obviously try and get that out of the diet. So therefore you have to menu plan a little bit differently for that resident. What's really important is that it's not because one person's got the allergen or the intolerance and everybody. So in schools, we actually see the policy there's no peanuts.
Yes.
I mean, that's probably done for a very good reason. Firstly, because that food supply is a little bit less controlled, and kids are kids, you know. They just,
Sharing.
That's
touching.
exactly right. So I can understand that policy around that. Aged care, it's a little bit different. This is their home, and I think that's something we've really got to remember, is the importance of the resident's home.
Yes.
So I can give you an example, actually, of an aged care home where they actually did have someone who was allergic to strawberries and apricots, and they actually stopped. It was a dementia unit. They actually stopped everyone in that dementia unit having strawberries and apricots.
Really?
So there was no apricot jam, no strawberry jam, no strawberry, no apricot pies, anything, no apricot chicken. And I was really I have to say I wasn't really impressed, because firstly I think we've got to maintain the integrity of the quality of life for our residents.
Yes.
And it is everyone's home. So again, it comes back to training. Staff have to be aware. Staff need to be managing the meal services at that meal service, and it shouldn't impact. So having numerous discussions with this home, I said, you just can't do that. I don't actually think that's very fair to all the rest of the residents, because they're all missing out on things they actually might like to eat.
Of course.
And that can then lead to, things like malnutrition
Yes, of
and weight loss. So we've got to be really careful in this environment. So again, I suppose what I would say is that shouldn't happen in aged care, and the aged care should work either with a healthcare professional like their dietitians to work out meal plans and things that actually help, so that mediates that out. So yes, the person who has the allergen or intolerance is very well looked after, and we need that to happen, but the rest of the group actually is allowed to have.
That's common
Those-
sense.
yeah,
of
it
course,
is,
It's
yeah.
common sense.
Yeah.
But as you say, with care and with training of staff, and of course the alerts that need to
Yeah,
be
that's
put
right,
in place.
most definitely.
So Karen, let's talk about eggs. Now, when I worked in an aged care facility, they could only have hard-boiled eggs. That was it. Tell us, what are they doing with eggs these days?
Well, eggs, that's been a bone of contention, I think, for quite a while.
long time.
Yeah. And I have to agree. I mean, I'm a soft-boiled, soft-poached egg girl myself.
Well,
so
I
I
think
would.
you're going to be getting that.
Yeah, so, well, I think there has been a little bit of a shift. There has been, which is really good to see within the food safety parameters, where you can actually serve a softish egg, so long as the white.
So soft centre.
Soft centre, as long as the white around the yolk actually has solidified. So what they want to avoid people getting is raw products in eggs. And that's why things, if you're using, like you can't have eggnogs, for example, and you can't have pavlova type products that actually don't have like a bit of a cook to them. So no raw egg, that's what they're really saying. And that's been, I think, originally it was hard-boiled,
Yes,
hard.
very hard-boiled.
So you could actually fling them across like frisbees and stuff, but that's actually changed now, and I think there's been a little bit of softening, only because we've got to recognise, firstly, under the food safety program and approved suppliers, most people are bringing in eggs
Fresh eggs.
We're bringing eggs that have been obviously from somewhere where it's a reputable supplier, they're clean, they've been date stamped, all those sorts of things are occurring. And then it's just a matter then of actually preparing them correctly. And you should always temperature test to make sure that those, eggs are getting to that kind of right temperature.
Well, thank you for that clarification, and I hope that helps you, because, I'd hate to think that I had to live on hard-boiled eggs forever.
You're not the only one. And eggs, can I just say, eggs, Karen, are a vital source of nutrition for our elderly, really vital, easy to eat, easy to prepare, and really yummy. Lots of vitamins and minerals.
So, Karen, we know that the laws in each, or the legislation in each state is a bit different around Australia, but certainly what are the most common laws that people are following, such as what we saw on the program? It's about as you say, a good food supplier.
Yeah. So really, I think for all food safety plans, it's actually getting your food suppliers sorted out, making sure they're obviously being certified themselves.
Yes.
Making sure you've got good relationships with those suppliers,
Yes,
so
of
you can
course.
have those conversations if you're not happy about something.
Yes.
It's the receival of food. So when it comes in, making sure you're happy with what it actually is and how it actually looks, and then it's how it then gets stored.
Yes.
So again, making sure you've got enough freezer space, making sure you've got enough cool room space, making sure those areas are being cleaned, first in, first out, that sort of process. Then you get down to your production, making sure there's no cross-contamination. You want to make sure that you're looking at how things are produced. Then obviously then it's the meal delivery system. How do they actually get out? Making sure those core temperatures of meat are meeting that 75 degrees or 70 for 2 minutes. Making sure things are being cooked through properly. Defrosting things appropriately. And then moving through the whole process of meal delivery, making sure the residents are getting a hot meal because that's really essential. And then following that, obviously, how do you clean up? So
Sure,
the
that's
dishwashers,
right.
making sure everything's being put away properly, the plastics aren't always wet. And then it's garbage disposal, it's looking at your chemical usage. And then finally, obviously, making sure you approve suppliers.
Yes.
And supporting programs are actually working really well. So education too, I think is really, really important.
Education is such a big thing
Yeah.
because, even the best of us can do that, but you only need someone who doesn't know. And in that case where, in our program's case where someone was from a different state and hadn't worked with this legislation, unless we've got somebody who's willing to help train those on the job.
And just talking about education, what I used to do when I used to work as the food service manager for an aged care home, I used to come up for, I used to do like monthly, like self-paced little education things. And like this sort of thing is great, Karen, like what the Aged Care Channel does in terms of giving people a good reminder. And really all new staff should be sitting down and watching a program such as this.
That's for sure, Karen. So right now we're going to the phones. We have a caller on the phone. It's Alison from Belrose Aged Care. Hi, Alison.
Hi, how
Thanks
are you?
for calling.
Oh, no problem. I was just wondering if Karen could just explain a little bit more the 2-hour, 4-hour rule for us, please.
Great. So, Karen, we have covered that, but go again.
Well, actually, something I've really probably also wanted to mention about the 2 to 4 hour rule is that it also requires people to understand how to cool foods down as well. So if, for example, you're cooking something and you maybe don't have a blast chiller, you actually can follow that rule, which means you have to get food down to 21 degrees and then down to 5 degrees within obviously the 2 to 4 hour or the 4 to 2 hour time. And that's actually really important to understand. So if you do have leftovers that you've cooked fresh with, so you can't, if you cook fresh, you can actually use that principle to actually also keep foods for overnight and use again if you need to.
Sure. Alison, I hope that's helped you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks
Bye.
for calling in.
Bye.
And now you're in the draw to win the $100 gift voucher, Alison. Thanks for calling. Does it matter if we cook the food, the chicken, higher than 75 degrees?
Oh, not at all. No. And often, sometimes the temperature will be probably over 80. Sometimes it can get to, close to boil. Well, actually, when you boil anything, it's actually 100 degrees Celsius. So the most important thing about food temperatures is to actually have, obviously you want to cook it over 75 degrees and you want to hot hold over 60 degrees at all times. Okay, but that doesn't matter, no. So, and really it's about making sure the product actually, when you cook it, comes out looking quite nice. So you don't want to actually cook it to death. You actually want to make sure that it's cooked well enough so that actually it's tasty and moist and flavoursome. So naturally you will cook things depending on what it is, and it could be literally over 75, but 75 is the reheating temperature. So it's either 75 or 70 degrees for 2 minutes when you reheat foods, okay?
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for calling in. Thank you. Well, look, time's run out on us today, but if you want to talk to Karen, she'll be available for another 30 minutes on the phone, so you can still call us. You can also email your questions at any time on msaus@acctv.co. Sign up to the ACC e-newsroom. You'll get to read great case studies, learning tips and exciting information from our partners about the up and coming conferences and events around Australia. Just go to acctv.co/au. Now before we go, Karen, what food safety message would you like to pass on to everybody watching today?
Karen, what I think is really important is it's a team effort. Everyone has to follow the food safety plans, do the documentation, and be really, I suppose, vigilant about what is happening in the food service environment. But again, it's that team. Everybody is responsible and everybody really needs to play an active role.
That is great advice. Thank you, Karen. And also, thanks for joining us for today's program.
Thank you. Yes.
A huge thank you too to everyone from Peninsula Village in Umina. The kitchens look fabulous in that place. Umina, of course, is in New South Wales. And for their support in the production of today's program, we'd like to say thank you to all. Our next online program release is Wound Care Skin Tears on the 20th of April. Why are older people more at risk of skin tears and how can we reduce this risk? Here's a short clip.
Hi Dad, All ready for the game?
Whoa, what happened to your arm, Grandad?
Oh, I must have knocked it on something.
Let's get you inside, Dad, and get that looked at.
Okay, John, we'll have this dressed in no time and you'll be ready for Luke's game.
Oh, great.
Gently roll the skin flap into place, just rolling, not pushing. When we're putting the dressing on, we need to make sure that it is in the direction of the skin tear. That's great.
John's wound is almost healed and it's going really well.
Oh, that's great, Dad. Thanks, Chandra.
Good luck in the grand final, Luke.
Thank you.
Let's go, Dad.
Okay. See you later, Chandra.
Have fun, bye.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
bye.
So that's wound care, skin tears. Looks fabulous, doesn't it? Don't miss it. I'm Karen Martin, of course, and from everyone here at ACC, it's goodbye for now. See you next time.
Thank you.